I mean, like, there's a whole bunch of shit.
Cool. I think I'm reaching the time. But to close this off, we have one lightning pitch. Because what's better than insights? It's actionable insights. So we all would love to see how you guys evaluate blockchain projects. Just like whatever comes to your mind, maybe questions, or maybe, you can criticize, or, maybe share your thoughts on how they can do better. And I think we have a candidate here.
Hi, my name is Swaroop. I'm co-founder of a company called BlockVigil. And I wanted to use the picks and shovels analogy, but that's been ripped apart. So I'm going to stick with what I put on my pitch decks. We are basically building an API for blockchains. I've been an entrepreneur for like 15 years now. And I got into crypto a little more than a year back. And I realized that there's a bunch of companies raising money, but no one's really building. And I worked with a company called Springroll, which helps. They're trying to be like a better LinkedIn. And there was a couple of other projects that I worked on the side. And I realized that, hey, why isn't anyone solving it really for developers and helping businesses come onto the platform? Because there's no experts. The technology is fairly new compared to everything else that has existed. And yeah, so we started out with Ethereum, and now we're working with blockchains like Solana. One of the founders is actually, he's taking video. Okay, now I'm a little more conscious. And yeah, so from a business or a developer point of view, we are kind of like a Twilio. So we just give you simple APIs, just like what crypto people like us say it for traditional companies. And we take care of all the intricacies behind the scenes.
APIs to do what? Yeah.
So whatever you're building, whether if it's, so I'll take a few examples. If you're building an exchange, maybe a more centralized exchange like Coinbase, you want to compete with them. So we will hook it up to the different blockchains, and you can build a better UX if you want, or you want to build a cross-blockchain sort of an exchange. If you're building... Sort of, yes. We are more focused on smart contracts than actually the fintech part. So I'm not a big fan of, I love the aspect of cryptocurrencies, but I feel there's too much of speculation around money. Like for our company, it doesn't matter if the prices are up or down. Actually, when prices are down, there are more people who reach out to me because they are believing in technology.
Consensus gives away was it Infura, or they, right? So are you Infura for other shit?
No.
Like make it simpler for me. I'm not that smart.
Totally. So Infura is solving actually one problem in this layer, which is having nodes itself is really hard because it just takes insane amount of compute power and server resources. So we are actually solving it on a much more abstracted level where you don't have to worry even how blockchain, like writing the code for blockchain. So we are literally giving you a REST API, webhooks to work with it. So if, like I built an example recently, it was kind of like a DocuSign use case because I was tired of signing documents with my advisor or investor. So we just we built something on our own just as a joke, and now actually a bunch of companies are using it. And yeah, but yeah, there's more. I mean, I know it's a little more vague, and we're just getting started out. It's been 8 months since we've been working on it.
What status is the company in?
So it's bootstrapped. It's me and my co-founder working full time. He's based in India. I'm living out of hostels, bunk beds, whatever you guys talked about, and currently being hosted by one of our partner companies, who Julia knows. Yeah, so we've been shying away from staying away from doing an ICO. We want to be. It's very surprising when I go and pitch saying we're a SaaS company in blockchain. Somehow something has turned, and everyone's like, such a thing exists? And I'm like, yeah, we have a little bit of revenue too, if that helps. And they're like, no, you should be raising hundreds and millions, and you should be having a valuation. And I'm like, okay, if everyone has the valuation, it's the same analogy which I wanted to say, who's going to build the picks and shovels? So, yeah.
So sorry. So I asked if it was mash rate for blockchain, which you know what that is. That was good. I'm still trying to get my head around what it is. So, like, if I'm a startup, give me like 3 clear use cases that you could power today because you have customers, and then one that you'd like to do next.
So So I'll pick the one that we ourselves sort of shipped a couple of weeks back. So I think the idea behind sort of storing some sort of proofs on blockchain where you're not locked into a certain company or where you have to pay a consistent fee for just storing a proof that you probably don't need maybe once in a lifetime. So it started out being like a DocuSign thing, but now I think it's going beyond that where it's kind of in the legal space, whether you're signing documents or whether you're just storing any amount of data and logic driven through a smart contract. So it's a little harder right now because obviously someone still needs to write the business logic, and we are not, we have built a few because we're a smaller company right now, and we're working with more people who can help us solve these problems. So the second example I want to take is Springroll. They actually were already an existing company, and I was just an advisor, one of the first people who came on board, and they have a bunch of people who are working on blockchain, but they were having trouble just keeping things in sync and just, you know, like they switched from different things and they even went to EOS and then they switched back to like, I mean, because they wanted to really build a product and not push on an ICO, and I think that's where, sorry? Yeah, and I think that's where we help, and if it's scale, like we were working with a blockchain like Solana, which is going to do 710,000 transactions per second, which is compared to our current Ethereum, which what we offer for, it's.
I mean, I guess I'll just say we're 10 minutes in and I still don't know what you do. Because if yeah, but if I push shit to a blockchain, I need to send crypto to make the thing work.
All of that is taken care of through our platform.
So
you
you
don't have to worry about it. So we have a custodian system as well. I didn't want to get into the technical details of it. You should. But
yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. So we have a sort of a proxy contract. So it's not just that we store the private keys. So our customer and us, we have a main custodian contract that handles all these transactions, but we buy the crypto, whatever the blockchain it is, whether it's Ethereum. Well, right now there's nothing on Bitcoin that we do, but.
Cool, let's wrap it up. I'd love to hear your feedback, you know, whatever, like we spent 10 minutes talking about this project, but share your thoughts.
The Twilio thing starts to make sense. I think you just are missing sort of the quick business sort of building blocks of we pass data, we pass the crypto, we pass the thing, and that allows the whole thing to actually work. And then I go, okay, up till then I was trying to figure out what you did and I still didn't get it. I think the biggest critique is probably the Mashable one, Mashery. Yeah, there were a couple of them. And API companies didn't own enough to be interesting, and they ended up being sort of interesting middleware that they couldn't tax anyone enough because you could always go around them if they charged too much. So far, nothing you're saying sounds like things I couldn't do myself with a little bit of work, and so I get lazy. And whereas Twilio, the one reason why like even AWS didn't do it is that the phone system's fucking annoying, and most people don't want to work with the telecoms. And so Twilio picked the hard thing that nobody else in Silicon Valley wants to work with, which is voice POTS. Most of the other things that you could make available via an API, people will pay you very, very little for, because it's like, well, I could do it myself, so if it costs me more than like a penny, I'm busy. I think my biggest critique is the comparables are actually more like Mashery, and they all did pretty poorly because you didn't own enough.
Yeah, I'm not gonna challenge the business because I actually want to give you credit on the pitch because I think that's the most useful thing, and I always like to give really valuable, useful feedback. This would definitely be a pass for me for that reason. Problem, solution, market, team. If you say nothing else in a meeting with an investor, those are the 4 things you got to get across. So problem, I didn't really understand the problem. And the reason I didn't understand the problem is because I live in the blockchain world all day, and look, I have like kids showing up in my offices showing me new blockchains they've built in their basement, and so I don't see where the problem is. Any smart developer born sort of after 1975 is already building blockchains in their basement. Solution, if you get to a problem that you can show me, and, the proof of stake one is kind of interesting, but I've seen like 5 companies that do that, and I'm skeptical. Solution then is like, well, this is why we make it better, faster, cheaper, defensibly. I'm not really a big fan of defensible, but make an effort. Market, how big is the market for this, right? So I don't know how big this market is. I haven't really researched it. I know how big the blockchain market is, but the sort of tools for developers, I haven't really thought about it. It's actually, I just made a note to myself in my head. I should go look at that. It's like kind of, so good job there. And then team, you did mention the team, but you didn't tell me anything about why you guys have a right to play, what the team is, the two of you, how you met, sort of anything in your origin story that would sort of make me feel like I have a stake in your business. And the team thing is not just about, here's our resumes. It's that feeling of, hey, my friend and I, we've been starting companies since we were in high school. I mean, Travis Kalanick, who's a guy I invested, sadly, in the company before Uber, he and his partner had started 3 companies before that. And they told me the whole origin story and the way they talked to each other, the way they treated each other. I was like, yeah, these guys are really, they're going to go all the way. Sadly, that didn't work out. But
Yeah. Actually, I liked his too, which is like, and I've been kicked out of schools, and I've been kicked out of jobs, and I'm totally unemployable, and that's why I'm doing this. Like, it's a fair point. The team thing was like, you got to brag about what an asshole you are somehow.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Suru. Good luck. You got a round of applause. Must have been a good pitch. Cool. What do you guys think?
Ni hao. Ni hao. My name is Akaris. I'm 5 years old, and I love blockchain. When you buy a car, there's contracts. But when you buy a house, there's nothing, and you have to have personal inspector. And I know that because I'm known of 3 properties. This weekend, when I buy my next house, I might have Carfax. This weekend, I hired those great hackers to build one real estate blockchain. It is inspection report and property history on blockchain. How cool is that? It's like Carfax for a house. My employees will explain how it works. I'm paying them my cryptocurrency I created. Shishi.
Right, high five. Nice work.
If half the entrepreneurs out there could pitch as well as him, things would be great. Okay, Gil and Titus were nice enough to agree to take a couple questions. We have one over here from Jory, and we'll just take quick answers from you guys because we got to be out of here by 8, and you guys probably want some more time to drink. So we'll just do another 8 minutes of questions if that's okay.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that pitch. As an advisor, I've worked with a few companies that were going to go ICO. That didn't happen for various reasons, and now reasons that we probably all know. And now they're looking for venture capital. I imagine that you are investing in companies not only from the crypto side, but also looking at them for venture funding. What kinds of milestones do you look for with a crypto company? I'm just wondering if it's any different.
I'm going to kind of do one of those answers that answers a different question than the one you're asking, which is governance, tranches, milestones. These are all new concepts for crypto companies, but are things that have existed in venture for a very long time. And I recently, I'm not going to name the company, but it'll become very apparent in the next 6 months. There's a company I was involved in that I was really a fan of. I love the company. I like the team. But they spent too much money on the raise, and they are running out of money now at the critical point where they need to be spending that money to finish their product. And we've seen this happen before in the Valley, but in the Valley, you wouldn't have $30 million, you'd have 3. And the VCs, i.e. me, would show up and say, what the hell are you doing? You spent $5 million, you're only supposed to spend $3 million. Get your shit together. Instead, there was no governance here. And so they spent all this money, they actually built something. It's not like they bought Lambos and went to, Ibiza. They actually built some real stuff, but they underestimated the capital they needed. The markets were soft, so they raised 30, but it was really 20 by the time they actually could spend it. And so the question you're asking is, the milestones should be the same for any company. It's about building your product, getting a prototype, building a team, hitting those milestones of adoption and product cycles. Nothing changes it with blockchain that's different than businesses without blockchain. And I think we'll see the same amount of loss, and we're just going to start experiencing that now where we see some of these companies. I mean, the one thing that's been propping up the markets a little bit is a lot of these people raised a shitload of money. I'll name one name here, AdX. It's a company I advised. These guys were originally going to be in the ad tech business. They raised $24 million when Bitcoin was at 1,200 and Ether was at 400. They started doing some treasury management at the right time, 16,000. So they now have a hedge fund focused on the ad tech business, and they're not building any software. Because why should they, right? And so that's never going to happen again. But it's an interesting thing about, we lived through this time where this wealth creation moment happened. Now we're going to start seeing the deployment of blockchains in real world business applications. And I think it's going to be kind of rocky for people who looked at crypto, and particularly token sales, as a way to circumvent the traditional capital raising process and checks and balances.
I have at least one company that decided to sell equity and tokens, and I want to kill them because it's stupid. Ripple, obviously, having shown how stupid it is. Because equity holders want the company to make money, and token holders want the company to make zero money. And so you fundamentally have two constituencies that hate each other. So as a general rule, I'm like, you shouldn't raise equity if you're a blockchain company, and you shouldn't blockchain if you're an equity company. Like, you gotta pick one, because it's hard enough, doing this with one master who's yelling at you about all the things you did wrong. God forbid you have two sets of stakeholders who are fighting, and you're in the middle, and they're shooting at you.
Any more questions? I saw your hand earlier.
Thank you. This is a really quick question. So, in terms of things that you would invest in, I know you like the wow, that's brand new idea, like Tesla Motors. What about a company that is an established multinational company doing well and is spinning off a division?
So first off, Fortune 500 people like to eat things that aren't ramen. Like, they like their expense accounts, they like flying business class, they don't stay at the youth hostel, they're going to spend all my money and accomplish nothing. Second of all, Fortune 500 people are focused on politics and budget and not execution, because that's how you win at a big company. It's all about politics and budget. And third off, the small division of a big company is where you put the employees you can't fire. You put the worst people at the shitty division, because it's like somewhere to put them, to be too kind, and you can't fire them. So you're taking the worst of political business losers from the Fortune 500 and blockchaining them. But that's just me not really digging in too much to all the other reasons I don't like it.
So I have so many answers that I agree with everything he said. And I can't, the problem with having a bit of a profile in the traditional world of starting companies and having a bit of a profile in crypto is that every guy who ever met you once at a cocktail party who's running I'm not going to say a spinoff, but who's running a sort of Series B stage venture-backed startup that kind of hasn't made its numbers, but has enough money to run for another 2 years at current OpEx, calls you up and says, hey, we're going to do an ICO, and that's how we're going to solve our capital problems. And the spinoff is simply that problem, but from a big corporate instead of from the sort of large S of Sand Hill Road. And that same problem they're trying to solve is that we didn't build a successful business, but we have capital, so we want to try and use that capital to somehow trick some more people to invest in our company. And I'm not that kind of investor. There are people on Wall Street who are really good at arbing the gaps in valuation models in corporate assets, and I am happy to have those people manage a small portion of my portfolio, and sometimes they make me money, sometimes they lose it, but for me, I back young, crazy founders who have no choice but to do this stupid thing, whether it's making an electric car or building a digital bank. That's probably not going to work. That was a stupid idea. That's what I want to hear is I want you to pitch me something where I leave and I'm annoyed that my assistant booked a meeting, and then 2 hours later I call you back to have breakfast. That's the meeting I like.
You actually remind me of, I'm going to go slightly off topic from this, but you remind me of one thing. You've probably all read the innovator dilemma shit that the big company never figures out the new company thing. I'm not bashing your idea. I'm actually going to bash VCs. It's more fun. what Richard reminded me of is for the last 3 years up until about 6 or 12 months ago, the only thing VCs knew about crypto was that their shitty companies were thinking about doing an ICO because the good companies weren't. And so every VC I was like, oh, they were like, it's a scam. It's a place where the shitty companies go because they weren't seeing Ether and EOS and Filecoin who were like coming up from the bottom and actually building shit with two dudes sitting in, pair programming in their fucking mother's basement where they're supposed to be, building interesting things. All they see was shitty portfolio companies trying to collect some extra money for their shitty idea that should die, but now it's gonna die slower because somebody ICO'd the fuck out of it. And so it was an interesting example of where like the VCs who ganged up on him at the conference full of orange bag chairs that I know of, we're all like, we've seen ICO and it's all the shitty companies. And they just actually didn't get it because they weren't seeing the guys coming up from the bottom doing really wacky shit. And so I loved seeing that your friends at that conference because they're all dickheads and they should all die.
Last question.
I had actually one more follow-on point, so now we're really going to pounce on you. I met with a corporate, and they're like, we want to do an ICO because we don't want to raise venture money. We can't raise venture money. I'm like, don't ever, whatever. I'm like, never say that to anyone because that's the ultimate terrible thing to say because no one. That's like, we're like, well, we want to go stand over there in the corner. Remember Animal House? We're like, here, go over here and meet the guys in the corner sort of thing. Yeah, so don't say that. But if we have one more question or not, gentleman in the back. Okay, and then we'll wrap things up so you guys have time for a drink. But first of all, let's give a huge hand for Yulia for putting this on, making it happen. Huge hand to Titus and Gil for being so generous for their time, and maybe we'll even hang out a little bit. And a huge thank to RocketSpace and BFast TV. We'll take one final question, then get you all out of here.
So both of you hammered home this idea of yourselves wanting to invest in founders who have nothing to lose, essentially, because that's what drives them. Do you find that in the crypto space, that same phenomenon blinds, let's say, us Western investors? Because we have a solid dollar to fall back on, a solid rule of law to fall back on, right? So this idea of censorship-resistant money and programmable smart contracts where the value lies more so in the developing world, it might often get ignored, right? Because capital is concentrated where it is.
I can hide my money from the fucking government. And people here are like, what? Why would I do that? I like the US government, they're pretty cool. In a very similar comparable to the way Skype took off across Europe and Asia, and all my friends in the US were like, why the fuck would I need Skype? My cell phone has basically free calling anyway, and I never call anyone outside of California, right? And all my European friends were like, dude, I call people in other countries all the time and Skype is amazing, right? So there's this element of that we're too fat and happy to need a currency that allows us to hide from when the Nazis come, right? Which my grandparents did. They actually sewed gold coins in their vests as they ran out of Eastern Europe when the Nazis were coming. And so there are people who still remember that, and that's why I hold Bitcoin, because you never know when the fucking people are coming for you. So there's that. QR codes in China being another great example, where it's we're all why the fuck would anyone use QR codes to pay for anything? That's dumb. How many people use WeChat now for that? 800 million at last count?
Well, I was actually going to tell, yes, exactly. I was going to tell a slightly nuanced story about one of my first ICOs I was involved in. So there's I did a turnaround of a Canadian company. That part doesn't matter, but there was a team of developers from Slovenia and Bulgaria that worked for the CTO, who was Canadian, who worked for me. And they were amazing, and we turned this company around and sold it and got the investor out of a lot of trouble and possibly jail time. And true story, 2 years later, this guy, Yuri is his name, I just saw him when I was in Europe last week, called me up, and he kind of hemmed and hawed. It was obvious he called me for something, but he was checking in, and I said, Yuri, what do you want? This is 2 years ago. He said, blah, 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 we're doing an ICO. And I said, what's an ICO? And Brock had mentioned ICOs to me, but I just felt this felt like pump and dump. I wasn't really interested. But Yuri then proceeded to explain his business ideas. His business idea was a super interesting idea, which is he said, look, I have this offshore dev shop I built thanks to you and my former employer. I just put all those people on payroll, and we started doing contracts, and we got $1 million contract with Amazon. Awesome, right? In Bulgaria, you get paid in cash every Friday. Yep. And by cash, I mean literally paper. Every Friday is payday. You go in the paymaster's office, and they hand you your payroll. And so Yuri is like, well, great news, I got $1 million. Bad news, I'm totally screwed. Because Amazon pays, best case, 90-day terms, and you got to pay those people on Friday. And so he said, for years, I used to go to the mafia, and they would charge me 50% interest per month.
Worse than VCs.
Yeah. And so Yuri said, we're going to use the blockchain, and we're going to create factoring. Because when he worked for me, he learned about factoring, which he didn't know what that was. He was astonished that we could factor invoices. This is like, it was the weirdest thing. My CTO in Slovenia or Bulgaria was like asking me all these questions about factoring. And so we sort of talked for a while, and I was like, that's a really cool idea. I'll give you a little bit of money. He's like, no, I don't care about money. I want you to be an advisor. And I was like, what's that? He goes, put your name on the website. We'll give you some tokens. I was like, so you're going to give me money? Okay, cool. Sounds great. The key to this is I then set up some meetings for him when he came out to the Valley with a few VC friends of mine thinking, hey, this is a super cool idea. I get the problem. And they were like, this is the dumbest thing ever. I'm not investing in some dude in Slovenia. I was like, listen, the guy worked for me for 5 years. He's a great guy. And by the way, if he was going to steal, he would have stolen then, not now. Nobody would give this guy money. He raised $8 million when ETH was under $100. So he has plenty of money, both for this business and other businesses now. But the fact is, the problem, no VC understood the problem because they can do factoring at Imperial Bank or Silicon Valley Bank tomorrow. It takes 15 minutes. But outside the Western markets, it doesn't exist. And that is where this technology will really shine, is those opportunities, which may not mostly be in the US. I hope some of them are here because I live here and I want my kids to go to school here. But, you know, we have a house in Portugal.
No, it's a good point, right? Vietnam is now a hotbed of crypto. I met with the CEO of Yandex, which is the Google of Russia, probably 5-10 years ago. And, you know, much like Google here, most of their customers are small businesses. And they would hire former Red Army colonels to go around and collect money in cash at the end of the month from their advertisers. And this was like, you know, 2005. And we're all like, are you fucking kidding? Like, we could, like, like Starbucks, you can't do that here. Like, you literally can't do that. And so there are a lot of these countries. I mean, the BRIC ones, clearly, right? Brazil, Russia, China. I didn't realize Venezuela. India has less capital controls. Like, anywhere with capital controls, anywhere the government is, like, shady, people love this shit because they trust. They may not understand Bitcoin, they may not trust Bitcoin, but they trust anything more than the government. Yeah. Like, anything.
I have a quick coda to my story. So a couple years later, they're actually 6 months ahead of schedule, releasing their product and their platform, and they already got customers. They have companies who've signed up to validate their invoices. But the most interesting thing about the coda of the story is that his team of 40 engineers and a couple of designers, guess what they require to be paid in now? Bitcoin or Ethereum, preferably Bitcoin. They feel like it's a safer bet.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that was another right up there with drugs. Offshore developers. I had a guy, same thing. We paid him in Bitcoin, and he bought shit off Amazon using some Bitcoin arbitrage thing to buy stuff for himself because he was avoiding taxes, he was avoiding the government, he was avoiding capital controls, he was just shipping TVs back to his house from fucking Amazon, right? And so, and again, you laugh because it's like ridiculous and actually criminal. Like, he should go to jail for tax evasion, but it's censorship resistance, and that's the thing that gets the crazy people super excited. And we like the crazy people in this, you know, gang of two here.
That's a great way to wrap up this fireside chat. Thank you. Thank you, guys. We still have until 8 p.m., whatever time left, 30 minutes for drinks and pizzas, whatever is left.